Welcome to today's Friday Spotlight feature. My name is Shivangi Garg, and today's session is going to be about one of Mesh's optional solution, which is about automation of CAN and invoice notices. In this presentation, we'll explore how this optional solution can be of benefit for providers who are help approved. In this session, we do have combined recipients from different Mesh products, which includes the meshed higher ed platform as well as the meshed Cricos platforms. So some of the terminologies as well as some of the screenshots in the upcoming slides could look different. So in today's session, we will be exploring a range of things, which includes the introduction of the topic itself. So first, we will try and understand what actually are these documents and who these documents apply to. So this includes the CAN or the Commonwealth Assistance Notice, the fee invoice notice, and the statement of covered fees, which is applicable for VSL or VET student loan only. We will then have a look on the CAN automation and will understand how this automation can assist the providers in maintaining compliance. There is also a key trigger point for the automation, so we'll explore that key trigger in detail and understand how that can be of help. And finally, we'll have a look onto the automation process and understand the automation process breakdown step by step. So let's make a start by understanding the concept of help approved. Any provider who is a higher education provider and is approved under the HESA or the Higher Education Support Act is eligible to offer funded courses to eligible students. Similarly, any Cricos or any VET provider who is approved under the VSL scheme or the VET student loan scheme is an institution that can offer funded courses to eligible students. Both these type of providers are also required to issue these documents that we are talking about in this presentation to their students in a timely manner to ensure that they are meeting the compliance requirements. The very first documents, as we have just mentioned, is the Commonwealth Assistance Notice, which is applicable for both higher education providers and VSL providers. Then we have the invoice notice, which is mandatory for VSL but is optional for higher education providers. And finally, the statement of covered fees, which is only required for VSL. So let's look at these documents in a bit more detail before we explain the optional solution further. So Commonwealth Assistance Notice or a CAN notice contains the following information, which includes a provider details, student and his enrollment details, along with the help loan or the VSL that the student is receiving. This can also include the loan fee, issue date, census date, and any other repayment obligations that apply to the student. There is also a timeline to issue these notices. A CAN notice must be issued to a student within 28 days after the first census date. So all clients who are issuing these CAN notices have to ensure that they are looking at the timeline and are ensuring that it is issued within the 28 days of the census date to maintain compliance. Similarly, fee invoice notice or a VSL fee invoice notice is a mandatory document that must be issued to students when they are eligible for a VET student loan. So a student may not actually be taking a VET student loan, but as long as the student is eligible, a student must be issued with a VSL fee invoice notice. For higher education providers, this document is optional. They may be issuing this document along with the CAN notice, but for VSL providers, this is a document which is mandatory. Now, what information does this document contain? Again, the document contains information which may be similar to the CAN notice, such as the provider details, student and enrollment details. This will also cover any tuition fees which are covered by loan and any other gap amounts that are to be paid by the student. Any terms and conditions that are applied for the help loan are also included in the fee invoice notice generally. To issue the fee invoice notice, there is a different timeline. So CAN notice is to be issued within 28 days of the census date, whereas the fee invoice notice is something that can be issued to the students 14 days before the first census date. Actually, it must be issued to the students 14 days before this first census date. Finally, we have the statement of covered fees, which is applicable for VSL or VET student loan providers only. This is an additional document that is not applicable for higher education providers, but must be given to each student who is eligible to take a VSL or a VET student loan. This is a written statement as to whether or not the enrollment for the student is accepted based on that some or all of the tuition fees will be covered by VSL. This statement of covered fees usually shows the total course tuition fee along with the tuition fee that is covered by VSL and any gap amounts that are payable by the student. This document is necessary and must be issued as early as possible. So the timeline to issue the fee invoice notice is before the first census date. Usually, this notice is given in conjunction with the fee invoice notice for VSL. And if you are generating it from the mesh system, the system allows you to generate the VSL statement of covered fees at the same time as the invoice notice. And it can be given as a part of the invoice notice itself, which is before the first census date. Now that we've understood what these three documents are and what are the timelines to issue these documents, we can explore the optional solution further to understand how that solution can be of help. So how can the automation help in this case? The first thing it does is obviously saving the time and resources. When you do have an automation enabled to generate the CAN or the invoice notices or generating both automatically, the time and resources required to generate these notices manually are saved. The user no longer has to go to the system and generate a document and email it to the students. Rather, the system does it automatically for you. It also helps you to maintain compliance and stay on track. Because the documents have a certain date or a certain timeline to be issued, it's always important for the providers to keep a check on the dates that they're issuing these certificates. When you have an automation running, the engine can be built in a way where the dates can be configured and the timeline can be easily maintained. So it also helps you to stay on track, that you never miss the census dates and never miss the key administrative dates to issue these documents. Reduces the risk of manual errors. That's a third important point for this automation, or the advantage for this automation. When you're doing these document handling manually, or when you're issuing these documents manually, there is a possibility that there could be some manual errors. You may miss out sending these documents to certain students, or the document could be mismanaged. But when the automation is doing the job for you, it's much easier because there is less chances or less possibilities for manual errors. And finally, we have a more efficient document handling that the system can maintain itself. The user no longer has to store the documents properly for each student because the automation can do it itself. Now let's try and understand what is the key trigger for this automation, which I did mention in the very first slide when we were talking about the agenda. As we have seen, all the documents require a timeline, or they have a timeline based on when they should be issued. The key figure in those timeline is the census date. Similarly, for this automation, the key trigger is the census date. The clients can specify the number of days before or after the census date they would like the automation to send the CAN or invoice notices to the students. Ideally, it can be based on the guidelines that we have talked about before, which are based on departmental guidelines. However, as a provider, you are free to provide your own timelines for the system to be configured. Usually, when this is configured and when the automation is running, the system will send one email with one notice, even when multiple subjects have the same census dates. And any unit of study codes or any units with outcome codes TCSI relevant 1 and 6 will not be considered, because TCSI codes 1 and 6 relate to withdrawal before the census date or withdrawal without any penalties. So based on the census date, the automation rules can be configured in a way where either the CAN or the invoice notice or all of the documents can be generated and sent by the system automatically. Now that we've understood the documents, the overall process of automation, and as well as the key trigger for the automation, Let's look at the automation process breakdown step by step and understand how the automation actually works in the mesh system. So I've divided the process into 6 broad steps, and in the upcoming slides, we'll try and understand in detail what each step means. The very first step is identifying the students where a notice needs to be issued. So this is the first layer of the automation process, where the system will try and find out the students who are eligible for a notice to be issued. Once the list has been identified, the system generates the CAN or invoice notice, whichever the user has configured, and also records the log on the bulk CAN generation page. The log is stored with the date and timestamp. After the second step is completed, the third step is to trigger an email to the students along with the document attachments, where a predefined email template in the system is used. The email that is sent to the students is also stored in the student communication diary in step 4 of this process. In step 5, the CAN or the invoice notices generated by the system automatically are stored in student document upload section. So the user can go and retrieve these documents as and when required. And finally, in the last step, all the students where the email was sent, a list is prepared and stored under the college materials for RTO manager platforms and document repository section for higher ed platforms. So this is an overall process of automation. Now let's have a look at the breakdown of each step and see in more detail as to what each step does. The starting point of the process is identifying the students where a notice needs to be issued. As you can see, this is the same list that can be generated from the generate bulk CAN or invoice notice letter page in the system. The system does the following checks to confirm the eligibility of students where a notice should be issued. It will check the course type and the student help eligibility status. So any overseas or overseas students in Australia are not counted towards this list. Student origin and taxi information is another broad check that the system does. USI and student status code for the subject enrollments are also checked. If a student is missing a USI or if the student status code is not an eligible code for fee help or CSP or BSL, the student will not be issued the CAN or invoice notice and he will be missed from the list. Outcome for the units. As we have talked about in the previous slides, any outcomes which are relevant to TCSI codes 1 and 6 will be ignored. And finally, the census dates for the subject enrollments. If the census date for the subject enrollments falls within the duration or within the check, the unit enrollments will be brought up in the list, similar to how they appear in the UI. Once the system has identified the list, it moves to step 2, which is generating the actual notices and storing a log on the CAN automation page. So here you can see that the system generates the notices as required, and then it shows a log record on the page itself, along with the date and timestamp for the user to check as to when was the notice actually generated. It also records the number of times the notice was generated. Currently, it is only once in the screenshot. So as you can see, it doesn't show the number, but once it is more than one, you will be able to see generated by the number of times. Moving on to step 3 is after the CAN or the invoice notice generation, the system triggers an automatic email to the student. The student receives the CAN or the invoice notice in their email along with the pre-configured template, which is existing in the system. However, it can be configured or altered by the user as required. The CAN or invoice notice goes as an attachment, as you can see in the screenshot below. Finally, in step 4, the document that was sent to the student and the email that is sent to the student is stored in the communication log or diary, which can be also retrieved and the user can expand to see what was actually sent to the student. So the user does not have to manually come and store this communication in the diary, but as soon as the automation does it, it automatically logs a record in student diary. Step 5 has the CAN or invoice notices storing in the document upload page for the student. The user can still go and retrieve each document generated for each student under the document upload page where it is stored under the academic directory. And finally, in the last step, for any students where the system triggered an automatic email with the CAN or invoice notice attachment, a file is stored in the document repository or college materials section. This file contains the recipient list, which the client can review at a later stage to ensure that all students who were meant to receive the documents have received the documents as expected. So this is the overall breakdown of the automation process, which eliminates the need for the user to go in and generate any certificates or send it out to the students. If you have any questions or have any feedback, you can write in the chat below. And with this, we come to the end of the presentation. For more details on this feature, please feel free to reach out at support@meshgroup.com.au, and one of our team members should be able to assist. Thank you.